"My husband is in the emergency room," I texted. "We are busy with Sarah," my sister said. Then she insulted my husband. The day I graduated college was supposed to be one of pure joy. Instead, as I stood in my cap and gown, diploma in hand, my sister Julia leaned in and whispered, "You know I could have been standing where you are if I hadn't given up my chance, so you could go." Those words clung to me like a shadow, following me from the graduation ceremony to the small celebration dinner at my parents' house. There, my father raised his glass in a toast that felt more like a contract signing than a celebration. "To Emma," he said, my name sounding strangely formal on his lips. "We didn't let you fall when you needed us. Now you're on your feet, and it's your turn to make sure we don't fall either." Everyone clinked glasses. Everyone smiled. But the message was crystal clear. My education wasn't a gift, it was a loan. And the payments were now due. Ethan, my boyfriend of 3 years, noticed my smile falter. He squeezed my hand under the table, his touch a silent promise that I wasn't alone. He didn't know then how deeply my family's expectations would burrow into our lives. 2 months after graduation, I landed my first real job at a marketing firm. The very day I received my first paycheck, my phone lit up with a text from my mother. "Sarah needs her fall tuition paid by Friday. Here's the account information." No congratulations on the job. No asking if I could afford it. Just an expectation, delivered with the confidence of someone cashing in on a guaranteed investment. "I'm going to help them out," I told Ethan that night in our tiny apartment. "Just until they get back on their feet." Ethan looked up from his job applications. "Your parents need to get back on their feet?" he asked, his tone careful, not judging but questioning. I sighed. Dad's business isn't doing great. And Julia helps Mom with Sarah, so she can't work full-time. And Sarah's school is expensive. Ethan nodded, concerned. "Just make sure you're taking care of yourself too, Em." But taking care of myself quickly became a luxury I couldn't afford. Every month, another need arose. Julia's car broke down. Dad needed dental work. Mom wanted to remodel the kitchen to help her depression. And always there was Sarah's tuition, books, camps, and college prep courses. I set up automatic transfers from my checking account, thin streams of money flowing steadily away from us. When my salary wasn't enough, I picked up freelance work on weekends while Ethan worked night shifts at a warehouse in addition to his day job as an entry-level accountant. We were 25 and living like we were 50, exhausted and watching our youth slip away, one overtime shift at a time. Maybe we could take a weekend trip? Ethan suggested one rare Sunday when we were both home. Just drive up the coast, stay somewhere cheap? Before I could answer, my phone rang. It was Julia. "Sarah needs a laptop for her advanced placement courses," she said without preamble. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of yet another request. Ethan watched me, his face carefully neutral, but I could see the disappointment. "How much?" I asked, already calculating which bill I could delay paying. When I hung up, Ethan didn't say a word. He just nodded and headed to the shower. I heard what might have been a sigh or a sob over the rushing water. That was Ethan's way. He never complained out loud. He just quietly took on more hours, more stress, more responsibility. While I transferred money to my family, he transferred his energy, his health, his dreams into keeping our little life afloat. We got married 3 years after graduation in a courthouse ceremony with 2 witnesses. We couldn't afford a wedding, not with Sarah's college application fees coming due and my parents' roof needing repairs. "We don't need all that anyway," Ethan said, slipping a thin gold band onto my finger. "We just need us." "When are you two going to start a family?" my mother asked during one of her rare calls that wasn't requesting money. I looked around our 1-bedroom apartment, at the stacks of bills, at Ethan's work boots caked with mud from his newest side job. "We're not ready yet," I said simply. What I didn't say was that we couldn't afford a child, not when we were already supporting 4 adults who should have been supporting themselves. Every month, the transfers went out. Every month, the thank yous never came. Instead, there were only reminders of what else I owed. "Remember when we let you use the car for your first job?" my father would say when asking for help with his business expenses. Remember when I watched Sarah so you could go to prom? Julia would text when she needed money for a new phone. And through it all, Ethan never said a word against my family. Not when we had to cancel our anniversary trip because Sarah needed money for a school trip to Europe. Not when we had to sell his car to cover a particularly large request from my parents. He just worked harder, longer, taking on physically demanding jobs on top of his mentally draining office work. Some nights, he came home so exhausted he fell asleep at the dinner table. Other nights, he didn't come home until long after I'd gone to bed. I watched him growing thinner, paler, the circles under his eyes darkening like bruises that never healed. I saw his hands sometimes trembling with fatigue, the way he winced when he thought I wasn't looking, the quiet cough that had developed and never quite gone away. Maybe we should cut back on what we're sending to your family, he suggested once, his voice careful, without accusation. But even that gentle suggestion was enough to trigger the guilt that had been programmed into me for years. They need us, I said, the words automatic. They did so much for me. Ethan nodded, his eyes sad but understanding. Okay, he said simply, then picked up his keys to head to his night job, even though he'd just worked 10 hours at his day job. By then, we were both 32, with nothing to show for our years of work except a rented apartment and dwindling savings. And Ethan? He was just the man who worked himself to exhaustion, never asking for recognition, never demanding his due, until the day his body could no longer keep the pace his heart had set. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in a marketing meeting, presenting a campaign to a room full of executives when my phone vibrated against my hip. Normally, I would have ignored it, but something, intuition perhaps, made me glance down. Ted, Ethan's supervisor. My stomach dropped. I need to take this, I said, stepping out of the meeting without waiting for permission. Mrs. Davis? Ted's voice was tight with worry. It's about Ethan. He collapsed at his desk about 20 minutes ago. The paramedics are here now. The world tilted sideways. I gripped the wall to steady myself. What happened? Is he... I couldn't finish the sentence. He's conscious, but they're concerned it might be heart-related. They're taking him to Memorial Hospital. I thought you should know right away. I was already running to my car, my presentation forgotten, my laptop still connected to the conference room projector. None of it mattered. Traffic crawled with infuriating slowness as I made my way across town. When my phone rang again, I answered it through the car's speaker system, hoping for news from the hospital. Emma, where are you? I've been trying to reach you all day. My mother's voice, annoyed and impatient. Mom, I can't talk right now. Ethan's been taken to the hospital. Well, I'm sorry to hear that, but we have a situation here too. Sarah's school is threatening to put her on academic probation if she doesn't get a tutor for calculus. We need to find someone by Friday, and they want payment up front. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Mom, did you hear what I said? Ethan is in the hospital. Yes, I heard you. But Sarah's future is at stake here. This could affect her college applications. A hot flush of anger rose in my chest, but I tamped it down, as I always did. I'll call you later, I said and hung up. At the hospital, I found Ethan hooked up to monitors in the emergency room, his face ashen against the white sheets. He tried to smile when he saw me, but the effort seemed to cost him. Hey, he whispered. Sorry about this. I took his hand, shocked at how cold it felt. What happened? Just got a little dizzy, he said, minimizing as always. Probably just exhaustion. But the doctor, who came in moments later, had a different assessment. Mr. Davis is experiencing symptoms consistent with acute stress cardiomyopathy, she explained. It's sometimes called broken heart syndrome. It mimics a heart attack, but it's triggered by extreme physical or emotional stress. Will he be okay? I asked, squeezing Ethan's hand. We need to run more tests, but with proper rest and stress reduction, most patients recover fully. The key word here is rest, Mr. Davis, she said, looking pointedly at Ethan. Your body is telling you it can't continue at this pace. When she left, I sat on the edge of Ethan's bed, tears finally spilling over. I'm so sorry, I whispered. This is my fault. Ethan shook his head weakly. Don't be ridiculous.
No, it is.
We've been finishing ourselves to support my family, and I never stood up to them. I never said no. He tried to say something reassuring, but a nurse came in to take him for tests, and I was left alone in the cubicle, surrounded by the beeping of monitors and the hushed urgency of the emergency room. I pulled out my phone to update my boss and saw 3 missed calls from my mother and a text from Julia. With shaking fingers, I opened it. Mom says Ethan's in the hospital. That's too bad. We need to talk about Sarah's tutor situation ASAP. No concern for Ethan. No asking how serious it was. Just another demand, another expectation that I would drop everything to solve a problem that wasn't mine. Something shifted inside me, like tectonic plates grinding against each other, creating the first tremors of an earthquake. I texted Julia. Ethan's in the emergency room. I might need help. Her reply came almost instantly. We're busy with Sarah. Maybe now you'll finally learn he's a liability. I stared at those words, reading them over and over, unable to comprehend the cruelty, the callousness. Ethan, who had worked himself sick to support my family, was a liability? Ethan, who had never complained as we funneled money to my family instead of building our own future, was something to learn from? I felt something crack inside me, not like glass shattering, but like ice breaking on a river in spring, a slow, inevitable release of something that had been frozen for too long. All these years, I had convinced myself that my family loved me, that they were just struggling and needed help. I had believed that we were in this together, bound by blood and obligation. I had told myself that the guilt I felt was natural, that I owed them for raising me, for giving me opportunities. But as I looked at those words on my screen, maybe now you'll finally learn he's a liability, the truth hit me with the force of revelation. They didn't love me. They didn't even see me as a person with needs and dreams of my own. I was an ATM, a resource to be drained, a well they expected never to run dry. And Ethan? He was just an obstacle to their access to me, a competitor for resources they believed were rightfully theirs. When Ethan was brought back to the room, I was still sitting there, my phone in my hand, those cruel words still visible on the screen. He must have seen something different in my face, because he reached out, concern replacing the pain in his eyes. Em, what's wrong? I showed him the text. He read it, and I watched a series of emotions cross his face. Hurt, then resignation, then a kind of sad understanding. It's okay, he said, his voice hoarse. They're worried about Sarah. People say things they don't mean when they're stressed. That was Ethan. Always giving others the benefit of the doubt, always assuming the best intentions. But I couldn't do it anymore. I wouldn't. No, I said, my voice stronger than I expected. It's not okay. None of this is okay. I took his hand, this man who had given everything and asked for nothing in return, who was now lying in a hospital bed because his body could no longer sustain the burden we'd been carrying. I've been so blind, I whispered. So willfully, stupidly blind. Ethan tried to protest, but I shook my head, silencing him gently. You've been fighting for us for years, I said. Now it's my turn to fight for you. The doctor returned with news that Ethan would need to stay overnight for observation, but the initial tests were promising. No permanent damage to his heart, but his body was showing all the signs of chronic stress and exhaustion. He needs at least 2 weeks of complete rest, she told me. No work, no stress, proper nutrition, and sleep. His body needs time to recover. As I sat beside Ethan's bed that night, watching his chest rise and fall in sleep, my phone continued to vibrate with texts and calls from my family. I turned it off without reading them. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't available to them. For the first time, someone else's needs, Ethan's needs, came first. And as I made that choice, I felt not guilt, but a strange, unfamiliar sensation spreading through my chest. Freedom. The freedom that comes with finally seeing the truth. The freedom that comes with deciding, at long last, to break the chains you've allowed others to place around your heart. While Ethan fought for his health in that sterile hospital room, I made a silent vow. I was done fighting for people who had never fought for me. I was done sacrificing for those who saw my sacrifices as their due. I was done. The hospital released Ethan the next afternoon with strict instructions. 2 weeks of rest, no work, minimal stress. The doctor's parting advice echoed in my mind as we drove home. The body can only handle so much stress before it breaks down, she'd said. This was a warning sign. Next time could be far worse. I settled Ethan on our couch with water, his medication, and the remote control. Don't move, I instructed. I have something I need to take care of. I retreated to our small home office and opened my laptop. My hands were steady as I logged into our online banking portal, a stark contrast to the emotional earthquake happening inside me. One by one, I located every automatic transfer we'd set up to my family members. Sarah's tuition, $2,400 per month. My parents' temporary mortgage assistance, $1,800 per month. Julia's car payment, $650 per month. Various credit card payments, utility bills, cell phone plans, and dozens of one-off transfers labeled simply family help. The numbers were staggering when viewed all at once. Over 1/3 of our combined income, flowing out month after month, year after year. Money that should have built our emergency fund, our retirement accounts, our down payment for a home. Money that should have allowed us to start our own family, take vacations, or simply breathe without the constant weight of financial stress. I didn't hesitate. I clicked cancel on every single recurring transfer. Then I went further, removing my family members as authorized beneficiaries on our accounts. As I worked, my phone lit up with texts. My mother, did you arrange Sarah's tutor yet? My father, the roof repair estimate came in higher than expected. Julia, forgot to mention Sarah also needs a new graphing calculator for calculus. Not one inquiry about Ethan. I silenced my phone and continued my financial liberation. When I finished with our banking, I opened a new email and began composing a message to my boss, explaining that I needed to take 2 weeks of family medical leave to care for Ethan. I'd never taken more than a day or 2 off, even when I was sick myself. The company owed me accumulated leave time, and I was finally going to use it. With that sent, I drafted one final message, a text to my family's group chat. I stared at the blank composition field for a long moment, decades of programmed guilt and obligation battling against my newfound resolve. Finally, I typed, "You didn't raise me out of love. You raised me like an investment. Consider this the day I stopped paying dividends." My finger hovered over the send button for only a second before pressing it. No going back now. I set my phone down and returned to Ethan. He'd fallen asleep on the couch, his face still drained of color but peaceful in rest. I gently covered him with a blanket and sat beside him, feeling strangely calm despite what I'd just done. For 20 minutes, there was silence. Then my phone began to vibrate continuously as the reality of my message, and more importantly, the canceled transfers hit my family. First came the confusion. What are you talking about? Mom, is this some kind of joke? Dad. Julia. Then the demands. Call me.
Now.
Mom, you need to explain yourself. Dad. Have you lost your mind? Julia. And finally, as they checked their accounts and saw the canceled transfers, panic. What have you done? Mom, you can't do this to us. Dad, Sarah's tuition is due next week. Julia. I watched the notifications pile up with a detached fascination. How predictable they were, how transparent in their concern, not for me, not for Ethan, but for the money. The money that had never been theirs to begin with. Around midnight, when the barrage of texts finally slowed, I picked up my phone and blocked all their numbers. Then I crawled into bed beside Ethan, careful not to disturb him, and slept more deeply than I had in years. The next morning, my mother appeared at our door. I answered it in my bathrobe, coffee in hand. "What is going on?" she demanded, trying to push past me into the apartment. "Why aren't you answering your phone? Why did our mortgage payment bounce?" I blocked her entry, my voice calm but firm. "Ethan is resting. He needs quiet." "This isn't about Ethan," she hissed, lowering her voice but unable to hide her anger. "This is about you abandoning your family when we need you most." Something between a laugh and a sob escaped me. When you need me most. When have you ever not needed me, Mom? When have you ever asked how I was doing, or if I could afford what you were asking for? When have you ever said thank you? Her face reddened. We're your family. You don't thank family for doing what they're supposed to do. Exactly, I said. So don't thank me for finally doing what I'm supposed to do, taking care of my husband and myself. I began to close the door, but she jammed her foot in the opening. Sarah's tuition is due, she said, desperation creeping into her voice. She'll lose her spot if we don't pay. Then I suggest you find a way to pay it, I replied. You're her parents, after all. How dare you, she sputtered. After everything we've done for you. What exactly have you done for me lately, Mom? I asked, suddenly tired. Besides make me feel guilty for existing? Before she could answer, Ethan appeared behind me, pale but steady on his feet. Mrs. Wilson, he said politely, as if this were a normal social call. I'm afraid Emma and I aren't able to help right now. We're under doctor's orders to reduce stress. My mother's eyes narrowed as she looked at him. You put her up to this, didn't you? You've always been jealous of her family. Ethan simply shook his head, unfazed by the accusation. I think you should go now. Something in his quiet dignity must have gotten through to her, because she removed her foot from the door. This isn't over, she warned as I closed the door. She was right about that, at least. It wasn't over. It was just beginning. The silence that followed was deafening. No frantic calls from my family, no financial emergencies requiring immediate attention, no guilt hanging over every moment of rest or enjoyment. Just Ethan and me, healing together in the quiet of our apartment, rediscovering what it felt like to breathe without the weight of others' expectations crushing our lungs. The dividends had stopped flowing outward, and for the first time in my adult life, I was investing in us. 3 weeks after I cut off my family financially, the first piece of unexpected mail arrived. It was a formal letter from Westridge Academy, Sarah's prestigious private school. Curious, I opened it. Dear Ms. Wilson, it read, we regret to inform you that Sarah Wilson has been withdrawn from Westridge Academy due to non-payment of tuition for the past semester. We note that payments were previously made consistently by you on Sarah's behalf. If this is an oversight, please contact our financial office immediately. I frowned, rereading the letter. Past semester? I had been making monthly payments religiously. There shouldn't have been any outstanding balance when I stopped. Ethan, I called, my voice tight. Can you look up something for me? Ethan, now back at his day job but thankfully free from his night shifts, pulled up our financial records. Together, we traced every payment I'd made to Westridge Academy over the past year. That's strange, he said, pointing to the screen. The payments went to an account at First National, but according to their letterhead, Westridge uses Metro Bank. A cold knot formed in my stomach. Let me see the name on that account. Ethan clicked through several screens, then sat back. It's a joint account. Julia and Sarah Wilson. The betrayal shouldn't have shocked me, but it did. All those years of sacrificing, of believing Sarah's education was the one pure thing I was supporting, and the money had been diverted. But to what? The answer came 2 days later in the form of another letter, this one from a plastic surgery center thanking Ms. Julia Wilson for her final payment on her mommy makeover package. The letter had been forwarded from Julia's old address, with my address hastily scribbled on the envelope, clearly a mistake by the post office. Mommy makeover. Julia didn't have children. I made a call to the surgery center, posing as Julia. Yes, they confirmed the procedures had been completed last year. Breast augmentation, tummy tuck, liposuction. All paid in full through a payment plan. A payment plan that perfectly matched the monthly tuition amounts I'd been sending. The revelation left me breathless. All those times Julia had guilted me about sacrificing her education for mine. Had that been a lie too? I couldn't stop there. I called Millfield Community College, where Julia had supposedly been taking classes before giving them up to help with Sarah. We have no record of a Julia Wilson ever enrolling, the registrar told me after checking their records. The house of cards was collapsing. One lie exposed led to another, and another, a cascade of deceptions that had shaped my entire adult life. My parents' mortgage, which I'd been helping with. I drove past their house on a whim and noticed a new swimming pool being installed in the backyard. A luxury they'd never mentioned during their monthly calls, asking for just a little help until things turn around. Dad's struggling business? I looked it up online and found recent news that Wilson Contracting had just secured a major contract worth millions. The article quoted my father. After years of steady growth, we're finally seeing the fruits of our hard work. Years of steady growth. Not the financial crisis he described to me month after month, year after year. And Sarah, sweet, innocent Sarah, the gifted student whose future I'd invested in so heavily, I finally worked up the courage to call Westridge Academy directly. Sarah Wilson was an average student at best, her guidance counselor told me, confusion in her voice. She struggled with attendance and motivation. We were surprised when her parents enrolled her in such an academically rigorous program. Each revelation felt like a physical blow. I'd been living in a world of carefully constructed fiction, my role as the family ATM secured through an elaborate mythology of needs and sacrifices that had never actually existed. The day after I discovered the truth about Sarah's academic performance, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Emma? It was Sarah herself, her voice small and uncertain. Can we talk? I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop near my office. At 18, she was on the cusp of adulthood, tall and poised in designer clothes I had unknowingly funded. But something in her eyes reminded me of myself at that age, confused, trapped in family dynamics beyond her control. I didn't know, were the first words out of her mouth. About the money, about what they were telling you. I swear. I wanted to believe her, but trust felt like a luxury I could no longer afford. What did you think paid for your tuition, Sarah? Your clothes? The trips to Europe? She stared into her untouched coffee. Mom and Dad said you were rich, that your husband came from money, that helping us was nothing to you. She looked up, tears in her eyes. They said you wanted to do it, that it made you happy. And Julia? I asked, my voice carefully neutral. Sarah's expression hardened. Julia knew. She managed everything, the accounts, the stories they told you. She's the one who convinced them you owed it to them. Why are you telling me this now? Because I got kicked out of school. Because Mom and Dad's house is being foreclosed on. Because everything's falling apart and they blame you. But She hesitated. I saw your husband at the hospital that day. I went with Julia, but she wouldn't go in. She just said those awful things and left. He looked so sick, Emma. I remembered that day with crystal clarity, but I hadn't known Sarah was there. Hadn't known she'd witnessed her sister's cruelty firsthand. I'm sorry, she whispered. I should have said something sooner. I reached across the table and took her hand. This sister I barely knew, who had been both beneficiary and victim of our family's toxic dynamic. What will you do now? I asked. Community college, maybe.
Get a job. I don't know.
She sounded lost but determined. But I won't be like them. I promise you that. As I walked back to my office, I felt oddly light, as if years of carefully constructed lies had been not a burden lifted, but a fog cleared. For the first time, I could see my family for what it truly was, not what I'd been told to believe. That night, I shared Sarah's revelations with Ethan. What are you thinking? He asked when I'd finished. I looked around our small apartment, at the life we'd built despite everything. I'm thinking it's time everyone knew the truth. 2 months after cutting off my family financially, I received a gilt-edged invitation in the mail. My cousin Megan was getting married, and despite everything, I was included on the guest list. Probably an oversight, I thought, or perhaps Megan hadn't heard about the family schism. Are we going? Ethan asked, studying my face as I held the invitation. I don't know, I admitted. The thought of facing my entire extended family made my stomach churn. Aunts, uncles, cousins, all of whom had heard only my parents' version of events. In their eyes, I would be the villain, the ungrateful daughter who abandoned her family when they needed her most. We don't have to, Ethan said gently. I looked at him, healthier now than he'd been in years. The dark circles under his eyes had faded. He'd gained back some of the weight he'd lost. His hands no longer trembled with exhaustion. "Actually," I said, a plan forming in my mind, "I think we should." The day of the wedding dawned bright and clear. I wore a simple blue dress, elegant but understated. Ethan looked handsome in his one good suit, the one he'd worn to job interviews and funerals but rarely had occasion to don otherwise. "Are you sure about this?" he asked as we pulled into the parking lot of the upscale venue. I nodded, patting my purse, where I'd stored the items I'd spent weeks gathering. "Completely sure." We slipped into the church just before the ceremony began, sitting in the back row to avoid immediate confrontation. I spotted my parents in the third row, my mother's hair freshly colored, my father in a new suit. Julia sat beside them, her surgically enhanced figure prominently displayed in a too-tight dress. Sarah was nowhere to be seen. The ceremony was beautiful, but I barely registered it. My heart pounded in my chest as the clock ticked closer to the reception, to the moment I'd both dreaded and anticipated for weeks. At the reception hall, we found our table assignment, far from my immediate family, a small mercy. People stared as we passed, whispers following in our wake. Word of our presence had spread. We'd just finished our salads when Julia approached our table, champagne flute in hand, face flushed with either alcohol or anger, possibly both. "Well, look who decided to show up," she said loudly, drawing attention from nearby tables. "The prodigal daughter graces us with her presence." I smiled calmly. "Hello, Julia. You're looking well." My eyes flickered to her enhanced chest, the taut skin of her abdomen visible through her clingy dress. The mommy makeover was worth every penny I see. She blanched, the flush draining from her face. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb, Julia. It doesn't suit you." I took a sip of water, keeping my voice level. "I know where Sarah's tuition money really went." Her eyes darted around, gauging how many people could hear our conversation. Too many, judging by her panicked expression. "You abandoned your family," she hissed, changing tactics. "You left us without a word, cut us off when we needed you most." I laughed, the sound brittle even to my own ears. That's a fascinating rewrite of history. By now, my parents had noticed the confrontation and were making their way over, expressions thunderous. Other relatives were watching openly, the bride and groom momentarily forgotten. "Emma," my father said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "This is neither the time nor the place." "You're right," I agreed, standing up. "It's long past time, and this is as good a place as any." I reached into my purse and pulled out the folder I'd prepared. Slowly, deliberately, I removed a stack of bank statements, payment confirmations, and correspondence, a paper trail of years of financial support. "For the past decade," I said, my voice carrying across the now silent tables nearby, "I've given over a third of my income to support my family. Money that should have built my future with my husband went instead to mortgage payments, tuition, car loans, credit card bills." I laid each statement on the table as I spoke. "Money that nearly cost my husband his life." I continued, my voice breaking slightly. "Ethan worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, so I could keep supporting you. He ended up in the hospital with stress, cardiomyopathy, broken heart syndrome. And when I texted to tell you, he was in the emergency room. Julia, do you remember what you said?" Julia stood frozen, her expression a mixture of horror and defiance. "You said, maybe now you'll finally learn he's a liability." I turned to the gathered family members. That's what my sister called my husband, who worked himself sick helping support her lifestyle. Murmurs rose from the surrounding tables. I pressed on, pulling out more documents. But here's what I discovered after I finally cut them off. The tuition I was paying for Sarah? I held up the letter from Westridge Academy. It was going into Julia's personal account to pay for plastic surgery. Gasps echoed around us. Julia's face contorted with rage. The struggling family business? I produced a printout of the news article. Actually secured a multi-million-dollar contract recently, after years of steady growth. My father stepped forward. "That's enough, Emma." "No," Dad, it's not enough. Not nearly. I turned to face him directly. You raised me to believe that family takes care of family. But your definition of care was one-sided. It meant I gave and you took, and when my husband collapsed from exhaustion, you couldn't even pretend to care. I felt Ethan's hand on my arm, steady and supportive. He'd never asked me to do this, never demanded recognition for his sacrifices. That made what my family had done even more unforgivable. You're causing a scene, my mother hissed, glancing anxiously at the other guests. People are staring. Good, I said simply. Let them stare. Let them see exactly what kind of family you are. Julia lunged forward suddenly, trying to grab the documents from my hand. You ungrateful bitch, she screamed, her composure completely shattered. After everything we did for you. What exactly did you do for me, Julia? I asked calmly, stepping back from her grasping hands. Lie about giving up college? Use my money for cosmetic surgery while claiming it was for Sarah's education? Insult my husband when he was in the hospital? She screamed again, an incoherent sound of pure rage, and might have attacked me physically if not for an uncle who stepped in to restrain her. My mother began to cry, loud dramatic sobs that drew even more attention. My father stood rigid, his face a mask of humiliation and anger. The room had gone completely silent. The bride and groom were staring from across the hall. The DJ had stopped the music. Every eye was on our family drama, unexpectedly the main event of the evening. In that moment of pin-drop silence, a voice spoke from behind me. It's all true. Sarah stepped forward, pale but determined. Everything Emma said. I didn't know at first, but I do now. They've been lying to her for years. Lying to everyone. My parents and Julia stared at Sarah in shock. This final betrayal from the baby of the family clearly unexpected. I hadn't planned on Sarah being here, hadn't anticipated her support. But as she moved to stand beside me, I felt a wave of something unexpected. Not vindication, but grief. Grief for the family we could have been, should have been. I gathered my documents and took Ethan's hand. I think we've said enough. As we walked out, heads held high, I heard the whispers following us, saw the shocked faces of relatives who had never suspected what had been happening beneath the surface of our seemingly close-knit family. For the first time since I could remember, I felt not the crushing weight of obligation, but the lightness of truth. 1 year after the wedding confrontation, Ethan and I stood on the porch of our new home. Not a rented apartment, but a house. Our house. A modest 3-bedroom craftsman with a small yard in a quiet town 40 miles from the city where we'd spent our entire adult lives straining under the weight of my family's demands. Can you believe this is ours? I whispered, leaning against Ethan's shoulder as the moving truck pulled away. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over our new beginning. Ethan wrapped an arm around me, his body solid and healthy beside mine. I've believed in us from the beginning, he said simply. Inside, boxes waited to be unpacked, new furniture to be arranged. A fresh start, bought and paid for with money that once would have disappeared into the black hole of my family's endless needs. After the wedding spectacle, my parents and Julia had attempted damage control. First came angry messages accusing me of humiliating them publicly. When those went unanswered, they switched tactics, sending tearful apologies that rang hollow after years of manipulation. Finally, they resorted to financial panic, warning of impending disaster if I didn't resume my support. I deleted every message without responding. My father's business, it turned out, had been profitable for years, but my parents had grown accustomed to living beyond even that substantial income. Without my supplemental funds, luxuries they'd come to view as necessities, the country club membership, the frequent remodeling projects, the expensive vacations, became unsustainable. Julia, deprived of her secondary income stream, had been forced to actually work full-time for the first time in her adult life. According to Sarah, who still checked in with me occasionally, Julia had taken a job at a department store cosmetics counter, a particular humiliation for someone who had cultivated an image of sophisticated leisure. Do you ever miss them? Ethan asked as we unpacked our kitchen, arranging plates in cupboards that belonged to us. not a landlord. I paused, considering the question honestly. I miss who I thought they were. I answered finally. I miss the family I believed I had. But that family never actually existed. We settled into our new community with an ease that surprised us both. Without the constant drain on our finances and emotional energy, we discovered resources we hadn't known we possessed. Ethan found a better job with regular hours and benefits that actually covered preventive care. I received a promotion at work, my performance improving once I was no longer constantly distracted by family emergencies. For the first time, we began to plan for our future rather than just reacting to others' demands. We started retirement accounts. We traveled, nothing extravagant, just weekend trips to the coast or the mountains, experiences we denied ourselves for so long they felt like unimaginable luxuries. And 6 months after moving into our new home, I stood in our bathroom staring at 2 pink lines on a plastic stick, tears of joy streaming down my face. "We're having a baby," I told Ethan that night, watching his expression transform from confusion to wonder to pure joy. He gathered me in his arms, careful and reverent. "We're going to be a family," he whispered against my hair. A family. Not the toxic tangle of obligation and guilt I'd grown up with, but something healthier, something built on love and mutual support rather than exploitation. Sarah came to visit us that spring, a changed young woman. After the wedding revelation, she'd moved out of our parents' home and into a modest apartment with 2 roommates. She'd enrolled in community college and found part-time work as a tutor. "I'm doing it on my own," she told me proudly as we walked through the neighborhood, my hand resting on my slightly rounded belly. No handouts, no manipulation, just honest work and student loans like everyone else. "I'm proud of you," I said, meaning it. She glanced at me sideways. "Mom and Dad ask about you, you know. They want to meet their grandchild when the baby comes." I sighed, feeling the familiar tug of guilt, weaker now but not entirely gone. "I don't know if I'm ready for that." Sarah nodded, understanding. "You don't owe them anything, Emma. Not even forgiveness." Such wisdom from my little sister, who had somehow escaped the worst of our family's toxic patterns. As my pregnancy progressed, I thought often about family, what it meant, what it should be, what I wanted for my child. I didn't want them growing up without grandparents, without extended family. But I also couldn't allow them to be exposed to the manipulation and guilt that had defined my own childhood. "We'll set boundaries," Ethan said when I shared these concerns. "Clear, firm boundaries. And at the first sign they're not respecting them, we walk away. Our child will always come first." Our daughter was born in the fall, a healthy, squalling testament to new beginnings. We named her Grace, not after any family member, but for the quality we hoped would define her life and our parenting. My parents and Julia didn't attend the birth or visit afterward. I sent them a birth announcement with a photo, but included no invitation to visit. The ball was in their court, and so far, they seemed unwilling to play by new rules that didn't benefit them exclusively. Sarah, however, embraced her role as aunt with enthusiasm, visiting whenever her school schedule allowed. Watching her with Grace, I saw glimmers of the family connection I'd always yearned for: unconditional love, joy in one another's presence, support without strings attached. "Do you think they'll ever change?" I asked Ethan one evening as we sat on our porch swing, Grace sleeping peacefully in my arms. "People can change," he said thoughtfully, "but only if they want to, only if they recognize what needs changing." I nodded, gazing out at the life we'd built from the ashes of manipulation and betrayal. A solid home, a healthy marriage, a beautiful child, financial security growing slowly, but steadily.
Peace.
This was what I had fought for when I finally said no more to the endless demands. Not revenge, though that had been sweet in its moment. Not punishment, though there had been natural consequences to my family's actions. What I had fought for was this: the right to live unburdened by manufactured guilt. The right to prioritize my husband, my child, myself. The right to define family on my own terms. Sometimes revenge isn't loud and dramatic. Sometimes it's the quiet power of boundaries maintained, of priorities rearranged. of values honored. Sometimes it's simply the courage to say no more and mean it.